Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Emma Weinlich. I'm Managing Director at Voyage Support and would like to welcome you to today's webinar, Managing Complex Care Teams, Insights from Specialist Support Coordination. For those who don't know us, Voyage Support is a registered NDIS provider specialising in complex needs, including specialist support coordination, positive behaviour support, and psychosocial recovery coaching, as well as MACNI Care Plan coordination, which is delivered through the Department of Families, Fairness and Housing. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're all joining today. We pay our respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. Today is really about the practical side of managing complex care teams and what helps when you have multiple services, different professional perspectives, and sometimes different systems all trying to work together around one participant. Today, we're going to hear from 3 members of our specialist support coordination team who work in this space every day. Steph Rietkerk, our program lead for specialist support coordination, will look at what we actually mean by a complex care team and later take us through facilitating effective care team meetings. Cavanagh will talk about roles and responsibilities and how we navigate different perspectives when everyone around the table may not necessarily agree. And Jackie Guy will focus on keeping the participant at the centre and building the collaborative relationships that make these teams work.
All right.
Steph, just a couple of quick housekeeping points before we get started. Today's webinar is being recorded and we'll upload the video to our YouTube channel afterwards. We'd really like this to be interactive, so please add your questions into the Q&A as we go. We have the time at the end for questions and discussion. And just a reminder that today is intended as general discussion and for sharing of practice experience. It isn't NDIA advice. So with that, I'll hand over to Steph to get us started.
Thanks, Emma. Welcome, everyone. So to kick us off, let's start by looking at what we mean when we're talking about a complex care team. A complex care team brings together services, informal supports, and decision makers to support a participant whose needs are interconnected and cannot be addressed by one service alone. And at its core, the team may include the participant, their family and informal supports. We've got decision maker, we've advocates, support coordinators, the daily support providers, allied health, behaviour support, and even within that group, there's a lot to coordinate. Yet the team may also need to work alongside broader mainstream systems. And a few examples of these are we have justice, child protection, family violence services. We may even have first responders involved. For example, a police disability liaison may work with the care team so officers understand how to respond safely when a participant presents a risk in the community. So as the participants' needs change, the team around the participant may also change over time. We also have that professionals might move into other roles. Perhaps the funding or eligibility may shift for a service, and a participant may even age out of a youth service, for example. Some services are also designed to only provide that short or medium-term support in any case. And then we have that the level of involvement can look very different across the team. Some of the services may provide frequent support and others may only be involved a few times a year or during a crisis. And each service then brings their own responsibilities, legislation, funding arrangements, governing frameworks, information sharing requirements, and of course their own way of working. And we all need to consider whether these services understand and respond appropriately to the participants' intersecting identities as well. And these systems, responsibilities and perspectives do not always line up neatly. And that is where we see those gaps. For example, a participant may need a particular support that is not funded in their NDIS plan, as the NDIS may believe it's a mainstream support. As we see this so frequently, the mainstream service may then decline to provide their service because the person is an NDIS participant, assuming that the NDIS should fund the support even when it actually sits with the mainstream system's responsibility, or the mainstream system isn't responding in a way that is alleviating the issue, and then it falls back to the team working on the ground to manage. A participant can then fall between the two systems and neither one agrees to fund or provide the support. And this is where the care team needs to collaborate and work across those system boundaries, clearly explaining the gap, challenging any assumptions, and asking which service, what flexibility, whether they have flexibility and what the responsibility it has also. If the issue remains unresolved, this is where a specialist support coordinator can step in and problem solve, and that becomes particularly important alongside the care team as well, of course. If you are new to human services, you might be wondering, how am I meant to learn and navigate all of these services and systems and processes all at once? And a lot of that understanding comes from formal study and training. A lot of it's also developed through experience, a lot of curiosity, and being willing to ask questions when something doesn't make sense. And a simple question can uncover a legibility barrier, an unclear handover, or a misunderstanding about the service's overarching responsibilities. And we are not expected to have every answer. And that is worth repeating. We are not expected to have every answer. What matters is knowing when to seek clarity and who to ask and how to bring the right people together so the participant is supported appropriately. Okay, Chris, over to you.
Thanks so much, Steph. So the next question is, who does what? Defining roles and responsibilities. So one of the biggest risks in complex care isn't that there aren't enough people involved, it's that there are too many people involved and nobody is quite sure who's responsible for what. So in a complex care environment, you can have anywhere from 10, 15 to 20 people involved, all supporting the one participant. This can include support coordinators, support workers, behaviour support, psychology, justice, child protection, just to name a few. And every one of these people can be acting with the best intentions. But we all know that good intentions don't create a coordinated system, so that's where role clarity becomes really critical. So one of the first things to do is to clarify the roles early. When becoming involved in a particularly complex situation, one of the first things we're trying to understand isn't what services does this person actually have, it's who is responsible for what. So even though these two questions sound very similar, they're actually quite different. I want to know who's responsible for the clinical decisions, who's responsible for implementing these strategies, who's responsible for monitoring risk and communicating with the family, and critically, what happens when something doesn't happen, because that's where role clarity is really tested. For example, if a medication review doesn't occur, who notices this? And if a behaviour support strategy isn't implemented, who identifies that? If a provider isn't meeting their obligations, who addresses this? If everybody assumes someone else is doing it, the participant can fall through the gap. So a useful principle to remember is if you can't identify that person responsible for the action, you actually don't have an action plan. So the next step is to understand each professional scope. As a support coordinator, you don't need to be an expert in every discipline, which is something that Steph just touched on then. So trying to become the expert in everything can actually become quite dangerous. The value is often in understanding who is the right person to answer the question. For example, if we're discussing a participant's medication, the support coordinator isn't going to position themselves as the clinical expert. And if you're discussing functional capacity, they're not going to override the OT. But you do need to understand enough about the disciplines to recognise what sits within their scope, what sits outside their scope, when their input's required, when another professional needs to be involved, and when a decision is being made without the appropriate expertise. That is really a critical distinction. So again, you don't need to know everything, you just need to know who needs to know what. And that's one of the really critical skills that a strong support coordinator should have when operating in a complex care team. Another critical step is avoiding duplication of responsibilities. So this is another major issue that is very common in the complex care teams. because duplication often looks like really good care. When you've got multiple people involved, everyone's communicating and everyone's doing something. But sometimes you've got 3 people doing the same thing whilst nobody's doing something else. For example, a psychologist might identify a concern, the behaviour support identifies the same concern, a support provider then again identifies that concern, and the support coordinator then starts addressing it. And suddenly you've got 4 people working around the same problem, but nobody has actually established who owns the solution, which is the more important question. So it's really critical to move from who's involved to who's responsible. So remembering that simply being involved doesn't always equal accountability. Setting clear boundaries. So this is particularly important for support coordinators because there can be a tendency to become the person who fixes everything and the go-to support. So initially this can feel like it is strong support coordination or coordination of the team, but you'll find that you're the one chasing the appointments, you're calling providers, you're writing emails, you're fixing staffing problems, and before you know it, everyone starts relying on you. And that's actually a big warning sign because you've moved from coordination to dependency. So a strong support coordinator doesn't become the operational replacement for every other support. Sometimes the most appropriate response is, that's not my responsibility to complete, but I can make sure that the person who is responsible is connected and the action is followed up. So that's an important boundary because if the SC is doing everybody's job, then nobody else remains accountable for theirs. Following this, the next important task is to identify who leads the coordination. This is one of the more important points, I think, because in a genuinely complex situation, somebody needs to hold the whole system picture. This isn't necessarily the most senior person or the clinician. It might not be the provider, and it doesn't have to automatically be the family. Someone needs to be able to look across the entire system and ask if all these individual interventions are they actually all working together? And that's often where specialist support coordination becomes quite valuable because in some instances, you might have a clinician who might be looking deeply at one aspect of the participant's needs. You'll have a provider who's more focused on the service delivery, and an OT might be more focused on the functional capacity. But the support coordinator can then be asking, how do all of these things interact? And where are the gaps, risks, contradictions, and duplications? So this is where support coordination comes in at more of a system level. So the goal isn't just for support coordinators to become responsible for everything. The goal is to make sure that everything has a responsible person. Over to you, Jackie.
You're on mute, Jackie.
Hi, let me start that again. Sorry, everyone. So I'll be covering keeping the participant at the centre. With person-centred practice, consent and communication. This is an area I'm extremely passionate about, and I've spent many years working around effective communication in a care team and with a participant. So it's a term we've all heard and instructed to put into practice: person-centred practice. It's respecting a participant's choice, treating them with dignity and respect, and involving them in all aspects of decision-making in their life. It's extremely important to keep the participant at the centre of purpose for service delivery. And what that can look like is checking in with the participant as a specialist support coordinator with the services they're receiving. Are they happy with the services? Are they happy with who is delivering the services, the time of the services, etc.? It can start with developing a support plan as well. I love support planning with the participant initially, nominee, loved one, and then you bring in the care team to complete the rest of the support plan. A support plan is designed to be a communication tool for the participant and their care team. It highlights their current supports in place, what's working, what's not. It helps to identify gaps in support that needs to be filled. It lists and outlines the role for each team member for each area of the participant's life. It tracks progress made over a planned duration. Now, particularly for specialist support coordinators, that can be extremely helpful when we're completing our reports. And I think it's also really good to reflect with the participant on the progress they've made throughout the duration of their plan. We're often focused on their inabilities to do things, to request more funding. And I think this can really be a tool to celebrate with them the achievements that they have made. It'll cover their mental health, accessibility, communication needs, cultural support needs, and considerations, likes, dislikes, etc. So we empower the participants to contribute to support planning and, where possible, plan nominees and loved ones. And we know in some circumstances that's not always possible. The participant may not be able to communicate verbally their wants and needs. However, the support team and the nominees, they can document and you learn what a participant likes and dislikes. They might respond well to some people and not so much others. And that's how we gather information about our complex and vulnerable participants when they can't or don't verbalize their wants and needs. So a support plan includes the participant's voice and what is important to them. And I think that really needs to be advocated for and supported. For example, a participant may get overwhelmed with too many appointments in a week. So you might have alternating allied health services in the week. The OT might go first, the behaviour support prac second, or even that could be too overwhelming for a participant. So you might have the OT come in for the first couple of months, and then they will step back, and then the behaviour support prac will come in and deliver that support to them each week. During that time, the OT or behaviour support prac that's not doing any direct support, they're adjusting strategies and providing recommendations to the care team in that time. Now, for choice and control, again, we've all heard the term choice and control, and I'm sure we have heard it a lot. How as a care team can we empower the participant to implement choice and control in their lives? So Voyage Support, for example, when we receive a referral, the participant is given a choice of support coordinators to choose from instead of just being assigned one in particular. They will get the choice, they will get a little the information about each support coordinator, and they can choose who resonates or who they think can best support them. Where possible, giving the participant choice in the care team and the people that support them. It gives them, give the participant choice to participate in care teams is what I was meant to say. Sorry about that. Being in a care team meeting and allowing a participant to attend to voice their wants and needs can be really powerful for them. If there are topics that are quite sensitive to the participant and may either be traumatic for them to hear or may cause them harm in some way, you can bring the participant in prior to that discussion at the beginning of the meeting or at the end of the meeting, again, giving the participant the choice and control to attend and giving them a platform to use their voice. Incredibly powerful. Privacy and consent is a non-negotiable. It should always be discussed with the participant. What information is being shared with the care team, I think that is also incredibly important. So it's not just about getting that consent form signed and filing it away and saying we have consent to share information, check in with that participant throughout the 12 months. If you need to share documents, where possible, of course, make sure the participant's happy for it to be shared. Do they only want part of that report shared with the care team or particular care team members? And sharing information that's relevant only to each members of the care team. I think they are big considerations, and we should always be reviewing that to optimize the participants' privacy and confidentiality. Okay, over to you, Steph, is it?
It sure is. Thanks, Jackie. Okay, so care team meetings, or facilitating effective multidisciplinary meetings, call them care team meetings, or because we love an acronym, CTMs. They can be very valuable, but also very expensive and time consuming. Therefore, bringing everyone together, we need to be really clear about why the meeting is needed and what the outcome we are aiming for. Even if that's purely just, collaboration across the team to identify any gaps and to, have a catch up and ensure everything's faring well, we still need to have a purpose to that meeting. We also need to consider whether a smaller targeted meeting or a phone call or an email could achieve the same outcome more efficiently as well. I love a long, unbroken care team thread. They could be very helpful when you look back at all of the history through those emails. So once we have the meeting purpose, we need to confirm with the participant whether they're happy to proceed with that as well. It is their meeting and their NDIS funding as well. And of course, as Jackie has mentioned, is it appropriate for them to attend? If attendance may cause the participant significant distress, or it may increase risk for them in the community, we can discuss perhaps a safer option with the participant or their decision maker. And this might look like the decision maker, guardian or advocate potentially attending instead. And we could look at following up with the participant after the meeting and just explaining what was discussed in the outcome of that meeting as well. However, as Jackie mentioned, wherever possible, we aim to include the person we support. It's inclusive and it's also a form of capacity building too. On the rare occasion, we may not involve the participant or the decision maker. And I've needed to hold a meeting where the participant was hospitalised and the plan nominee was misusing substances and threatening the safety of that participant. In that case, it made sense to hold an urgent professionals only meeting to assess that situation and consider our response. If the plan nominee was there, it could have increased the risk to the participant and resulted in complete service disengagement. So that was a professional's decision. Okay, so we also need to look at what professionals will be invited along as well. First, is there enough funding for them to attend? Second, sometimes we hold a meeting that is too large, or if we hold a meeting that is too large, people might struggle to speak up or have enough time to say their piece. And it's really hard to get to the core of the issue. And therefore, we may need a more targeted response with the right people in the room. Third, if a crucial person is unavailable, should we reconsider the date or the time? Because if we go ahead with the meeting without the expertise needed, we may not reach the outcome that we're hoping for. And once the date and the attendees are set, of course, let's not forget to build out an agenda, ask the team for any additions and lock the date into the calendar. And that covers the planning. And once the CTM actually begins, our focus shifts to making sure the conversation remains useful. And of course, we refer to that agenda when needed to stay on track. Check everyone has been introduced. I've been in so many CTMs where I don't know who half of the people in the room are. And, you know, especially as a new support coordinator, it's so important we know who is in the room with us so we can collaborate properly. So check everyone's been introduced, and we also understand really what their role and their responsibilities are as well. That way, the conversation will flow a lot better. And I always like to say an acknowledgement of country at the beginning too. So if the participant is finding it difficult to stay on topic in a meeting, it might be worthwhile, and Jackie touched on this as well, it might be worthwhile, you know, before the meeting, just to review the agenda with the participant, just remind them of the time of the meeting and that it's important that we stay on track to try and find an outcome. And I feel that this can be a bit more respectful than redirecting them in front of the whole team. And of course, during the CTM, keep the conversation accessible and be mindful of any triggers as well, and slow down or explain, you know, what everything means if the discussion becomes too technical. And occasionally we have a professional that dominates the discussion. I think in these situations, it can be tricky, but if you are facilitating, we can acknowledge and redirect that. I can see this is important. Perhaps we need to take this offline. I'm mindful of time and today's agenda. And I personally love a roundtable update in CTMs. A roundtable can give quite a team member space to share their updates or concerns, and it opens discussions with other team members as well. And I think leaving some quiet time, leaving a little bit of space and not trying to fill every gap in the conversation can be helpful too. Not everyone in the team is an off-the-cuff thinker, and a bit of pause and silence can really help people to process the discussion and contribute more thoughtfully. So as a facilitator, we're actively listening to always actively listening throughout the CTM to resolve any unresolved issues and any sticking points. To do this, we need to sometimes dig a little deeper, and that can sometimes feel awkward. I once facilitated a CTM where a new SIL provider was giving a participant with schizophrenia PRN medication most mornings. That just didn't sit right with me. Just gut instinct, perhaps also that I knew prior to the SIL, he was stable. So I dug a little deeper. So by asking why the PRN was needed so frequently, and also inviting his father to share what he knew in that moment, we actually identified a gap in the SIL team's understanding and of the understanding of the participant and their usual presentation of what distress looks like for them. And we then were able to organise that the father and the behaviour support prac then developed clearer guidance for the SIL team. The PRN use was significantly reduced. The SIL team became a lot more confident when working with him. That's just a small example of how asking the right question can turn a concern into a coordinated response in the team. And as specialist support coordinators, we're continuously monitoring for emerging or escalating risks and identifying gaps between services and systems. When the usual pathway isn't working, we bring in the relevant people to assess the risk, review existing controls and determine what needs to change and implement those appropriate actions. So these could be people as well that may not be in your regular care team, but perhaps you need some additional consultation, and that may make that, you know, that's perhaps been realized in your conversation. And that brings us to actions and timeframes. So before the CTM closes, confirm what needs to happen, who is responsible, and when it's due. We need to circulate the minutes, of course, and track the actions. I personally like to add reminders to calendars, particularly when it's agreed reporting deadlines, which are very important. Otherwise, we risk having a very productive meeting where everyone agrees and then everyone leaves assuming someone else will do it. And we've all been in one of those meetings before. So that leads on nicely to your slide, Chris.
Thank you very much, Steph. And as you just touched on, one of the biggest challenges in care team meetings is navigating different perspectives. So one of the more common roles that a support coordinator would take on in a complex care team meeting is managing conflict and maintaining focus. Despite the obvious drawbacks, conflict also plays a really meaningful role in care teams. So if you've got a care team where everyone agrees with each other all the time, it actually can be a bit of a red flag and quite concerning, because complexity often creates different perspectives, and different perspectives are not necessarily conflict. So they can actually be one of the greatest assets for a multidisciplinary team. And often the problem isn't disagreement, the problem is unproductive disagreement, which I think there is a clear distinction. So different opinions are to be expected. You might have a support worker who sees a participant at 7 a.m. The psychologist might see them for an hour every fortnight. A BSP might analyse patterns across different months. A parent may have known them for 30 years, and the participant has their own lived experience. So all of these perspectives are really valid sources of information, but they aren't necessarily equivalent. So our job as a support coordinator is to bring those perspectives together without allowing one person's professional title or opinion to override everyone else's experience. So a support worker saying, this is what I'm seeing every day, it is valuable evidence, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they have the clinical expertise to determine why it's happening. And likewise, a clinician's opinion is extremely important, but it doesn't mean they necessarily have the day-to-day understanding of what happens in the participant's environment. So the best teams don't necessarily ask who's right, they ask, what does each person know that the rest of us don't, which I think is a really productive question. The next step is to separate facts from opinions. So when disagreements start escalating, and they often do in care team meetings that are quite complex, you need to ask, what do we know? What have we observed? What are we interpreting? What are we assuming? And what evidence do we have? For example, a participant might be refusing support. That's an interpretation. But what we actually know is the participant declined support on 4 occasions between Monday and Friday. That's the fact. So then we ask why. Maybe they're anxious. Maybe the work is not a good fit. Maybe the support is being offered at the wrong time. We don't know yet. And this distinction really matters, because if we turn an assumption into fact, we can build an entire intervention around something that isn't actually true, which is very dangerous in any type of complex care. Often forgotten but crucial in a care team is returning to the participant's goals. This is where I think a lot of care teams get lost, particularly those bigger ones that can have 15, 20 people involved. You often have people advocating for their own professional perspective. The OT wants one thing, psychologist wants another, the provider wants something operationally different, family wants something else, and eventually the meeting kind of ends up in this position where whose professional opinion wins? And that's the wrong question to be asking, when really we should be looking at, what are we trying to achieve for this participant? And what does the participant want? Because the participant isn't actually a collection of disciplines and professions. They're one person. And sometimes bringing the discussion back to the participant's actual goals completely changes the conversation and the direction of the support being implemented. So instead of saying, I don't agree with your opinion or I don't agree with this approach, we should be asking, given what the participants told us, what they want, what approach is most likely to help us achieve that? I think that's a much more constructive conversation, and it kind of flows neatly into this next point, which is balancing the duty of care and dignity of risk. So this is where complex care becomes, I think, one of the more difficult challenges when navigating complex care teams, because obviously the safety of the participant is crucial, but autonomy is also really important to maintain for the participant. And we can't create a risk-free life for another adult, and nor should we try. Because I think if you would try to eliminate every activity that contains risk, you're also eliminating things such as choice and control, quality of life, growth, learning, independence, and even things such as community participation. So when a participant wants to do something that carries risk, the question shouldn't just be, how do we stop this? I think you need to be looking at the broader picture, saying, what is the risk? How significant is it? What evidence do we have? What does the participant understand about that risk? And can the risk be reduced rather than eliminated? And what does the participant want? So the objective isn't to create a life with zero risk. It's to support informed decision-making and manage reasonable risk whilst preserving dignity, choice, and control. Another key task in a complex care team is escalating when appropriate. So a strong coordinator also needs to know when not to coordinate through a problem. I think we've all been in that position where you can identify what the problem is, but sometimes you don't have the resources or the tools, skills, or expertise to work through it. So this is a time when a matter really needs to be escalated. So this might involve immediate safety concerns, safeguarding concerns, significant clinical deterioration, allegations of abuse or neglect, or serious provider failings. So sometimes people feel that escalating means they've failed the situation, but I think it's an important distinction, because knowing when something is beyond your scope or authority or expertise is actually a good sign of, or it's a sign of good practice rather, and not poor practice. So the specialist support coordinator shouldn't be the final authority on everything. I think their job is to ensure that the issue reaches the right authority, professional, or system. Something that I've seen in many care teams over the years is what's called the bystander effect. And Steph touched on this briefly. It's when the responsibility belongs to everyone, it can end up belonging to no one. And I think in a meeting when everybody agrees the participant's situation is deteriorating, for example, everyone's concerned, everyone agrees that something needs to happen, the meeting ends, 2 weeks later, nothing's happened. I think everyone has been in a situation where they've been in a care team meeting like that. And it's not because everyone's deliberately failed, it's because everyone's assumed that someone else would act. And I think that is essentially the bystander effect in complex care. And the more professionals that you tend to have in a team where you've got those 15, 20 people involved, the greater the risk that can become. So I think that's where you really need to convert concern into ownership. So not just somebody should follow this up, it's who is going to follow this up, and not we should get an assessment, but who's requesting it, by when, and who needs to receive that information. Whenever a complex care team becomes stuck, it can actually be quite helpful asking the following 5 questions. So what do we know? So separating evidence from assumption, as we touched on. What does the participant want? So bringing it back to make it more person-centered. Who has the right expertise? So don't solve problems outside of your scope. Who owns the action? So turning discussion into accountability. And when are we reviewing it? An action without a review is obviously a point that can just disappear very quickly. So complex care teams don't really fail because people don't care. They usually fail because complexity creates ambiguity. And the role of a specialist support coordinator is to bring structure to that complexity. Over to you, Jackie.
You're on mute again now, Jackie.
I'm too polite. I always have it on mute. Sorry, guys. Let me start this one again. So listening back to Steph and Chris today, what really stands out is the importance of communication and effective communication, and how you communicate with others in the care team will impact how the care team flows. So building collaborative relationships, I think will always start and finish with communication again. And I'm sure people will get sick of me saying communication, but it can be so powerful to supporting your participant. I'm a huge advocate with building connections with the care team members. You need to build trust. You need to have a trusting care team, and trust begins at the time a support coordinator will submit a referral for service for providers. I think providing a detailed referral, for example, the support plan, if the participant consents, if you submit that at the time of referral, it will provide the person with great detail of the participant's support needs, the type of support that the participant wants and needs, and a complete snapshot of their care and their lives as well. It'll set them up for better success to be able to connect with the participant too. And I think it is just a really great start for the new care team member. I think as part of building the care team members, we need to, an effective care team, we need to respect each discipline's expertise, which is the second point. I think we need to make sure to work within our scope of practice, which both Chris and Steph have touched base on today. Again, that links back to respect. I've just lost my place, sorry. Sometimes as support coordinators, we can feel at the forefront of a care team. So us as support coordinators, demonstrating good communication and good behaviour through actions can be quite powerful to spread through the care team. Building a care team that is also suitable to the participants' personal, cultural, emotional, and disability support needs is fantastic. With raising difficult conversations effectively, I think it is respectful to speak to the care team member individually and to not raise these topics in the care team. I think it can be quite humiliating, and it's a really good practice to, if there's any issues raised, to speak with that care team member privately. And when you do that, provide a safe space for them, make them feel comfortable to respond and to discuss with you what the issue is. Having that strong relationship with the care team makes it easier for any difficult conversation that you may need to have down the track in the participant's journey. So, for example, you noticed that a SIL provider had dropped off on their fortnightly updates, and that had been consistent for about 5 weeks, 6 weeks. So you can just give them a call and check in. First, ask how they are. Let them know that you've noticed the reports had dropped off or that you hadn't received any, and ask if you can be of assistance in any way. You'll find that the response you get back is much better than if you approach it more abruptly. So where am I? Introduce new providers effectively. I think to build strong foundations for new care team members from the beginning, it's effective to meet with the care team member separately. So give them the update, let them know who each care team member is, and go through the support plan with them. What key role do they play in the participant's care team? Most importantly, update the new care team member about the participant. Then welcome the care team member to the team. Have a chain email, give them a warm welcome, make them feel welcome. And then again in the care team, at the top of the agenda items, welcome the new team member, ask them to introduce themselves and a little bit about themselves. I think it's a really nice ease into the team, and they also feel like they are an additional valuable member of the care team as well. If you are the member that is being added into the care team and it's an existing care team and you've never met them before, I think it can be fun if you don't get the same welcoming. You can always share something fun about yourself or something you're passionate about in the care team meeting. And then again, call each care team member that's existing and introduce yourself. So work towards shared outcomes. Working collaboratively involves sharing the relevant data and findings where consent has been provided. I think it's extremely important to continue sharing that data throughout the participant's journey so that other care team members can continue delivering precise support with the precise information about the participant. Collaborate when gathering evidence. It's always been well received when there's an acknowledgement to care team members throughout the journey and their level of expertise, contribution of work that's resulted. Oh, I'm so sorry, Emma. I might just stop. I don't know what's happened to my notes and I've gone blank.
All good. No, fantastic.
sorry.
All good. Thank you, Jackie, Steph, and Chris. It's been really, really informative, and it's been such a good session. We are up to the questions section. So would love to hear from you all. If you've got any questions for the team, please pop them into the Q&A. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a question. If it's something that we've discussed today and it resonates with your own experience, please feel free to share that as well. We know that there's a lot of experience in the room, so this is a great opportunity to continue the conversation and learn from each other. While everyone's having a think, I might just get the conversation started with a question for the team. If you could give one piece of advice to a support coordinator who's just taken over a participant with a large complex care team, from your experience, what would it be? I'll leave it up to you as to who wants to get started.
Well, I feel that Jackie was just touched on that quite well in terms of just getting to know everyone very well, including the participant. I think that's the first step. So we can't manage a team without really understanding who the participant is, because everything comes right back to the participant on all of our decisions, who they are as a person, what they want, what their needs are. So get to know the participant and then everyone else. Chris, Jackie?
Yeah, I mean, echoing what you said, Steph, I think you can't do your job properly if you don't know the participant well, what they want. Everything comes second to the participant. So I think having a really good understanding of their needs, their current supports, what they're needing moving forward, and then getting a better understanding of the care team and where that's actually heading. I think we've all been in those teams where you jump into such a big team and you don't know who's who, and you end up spending the best part of a month trying to chase up people individually, and it can get quite messy and time flies by and you realize that nothing's been done. So I think starting with the basics, and I think just keep it simple and start with the participant and go from there.
Absolutely. And don't be scared to ask questions. That's a big one. I think it's really easy in such a huge team to kind of be drowned out as the newbie, just feel confident enough to ask questions. Or if you can't do that in a care team meeting, perhaps do that by picking up the phone and getting across all of the happenings.
I think yourself and Chris hit the nail on the head talking about being curious and continuing to ask questions. I think it's that saying there's no such thing as a silly question. Quite often it can be a question that a care team member thinks is silly, but it's just something that hasn't been raised yet, and it can just start a whole new conversation, and yeah, it can lead you into some wonderful thoughts and wonderful outcomes for the participant.
No, thank you. Steph, have any other questions come through?
They haven't.
They haven't? No worries. No, thank you. Look, the overarchingly, the key takeaway from this, from my perspective as well, just listening to everything, is to invest in the relationships around the participant, because strong collaborative relationships make it easier to navigate complexity when things become difficult. So, yeah, and it's all been explained really beautifully throughout the webinar. Now, before we finish, just a quick reminder that we'll make today's recording available after the session. You can also find our previous webinars on the Voyage Support YouTube channel and through our resources section on our website page, which is a very new page, where we're continuing to add practical learning resources. And if you'd like to hear about upcoming webinars, you can also join our Learning Hub mailing list through our website. Finally, a big thank you to Steph, Chris, and Jackie for sharing your experiences with us today, and thank you to everyone who joined us and contributed to the discussion. We hope you've been able to take away something practical that you can use in your own work with complex care teams. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.